I never imagined that the man I married would strip away every illusion I clung to, layer by layer, until I was left staring at the hollow shell of myself. For 3 agonizing years, he faked poverty, not out of desperation, but to unmask me as the gold digger he suspected I was from the start. And when the truth finally erupted, it didn't just break me. It pulverized the fragile facade I'd built my life on. My name is Mara, and this is the confession of how I walked into my own destruction, eyes wide open, chasing shadows of security that were never real. It began in the dim underbelly of Milan, where the air always carried the faint tang of rain-soaked cobblestones and unspoken threats. I was 24 then, fresh from a childhood that had taught me survival meant attaching yourself to power, no matter the cost. My father had been a small-time enforcer for one of the lesser families, the kind who ended up face down in the Arno for borrowing money he couldn't repay. My mother? She vanished when I was 12, leaving behind a note that read like a suicide letter, but without the body to prove it. I learned early that love was a luxury for fools, and wealth was the only armor against the world's sharp edges. I met him, Luciano, at a gala thrown by the Rossi family, one of those opulent affairs where crystal chandeliers hung like nooses over tables laden with caviar and vintage Barolo. He wasn't the center of attention. That was reserved for the capos, with their diamond cufflinks and entourages of bodyguards. Luciano stood in the shadows, nursing a glass of whiskey, his eyes scanning the room like a predator assessing prey. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline carved from marble and ink-black hair that fell just slightly unkempt, he exuded a quiet menace that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I approached him not because of attraction, though there was that, a dangerous pull, but because I'd overheard whispers. He was rising fast in the underworld, heir to a fortune built on smuggling and extortion. Our conversation started innocently enough. "You look like you're plotting someone's demise," I said, sliding onto the stool beside him. He turned those steel-gray eyes on me, and for a moment I felt exposed, as if he could see through the silk of my borrowed dress to the desperation underneath. "Perhaps I am," he replied, his voice a low rumble that carried the weight of secrets. "And you? What brings a woman like you to a den of wolves?" I laughed, a practiced sound that masked the truth. "Opportunity. Isn't that why we're all here?" He bought me a drink and we talked, or rather, I talked, weaving tales of my aspirations in art curation, a lie I'd polished to hide my real job as a hostess in a high-end club where men paid for company that bordered on the illicit. Luciano listened, his gaze never wavering, and by the end of the night he'd asked for my number. It was calculated on my part. I saw in him the escape I needed from the cycle of debt and danger that had defined my life. He was wealthy, connected, and if the rumors were true, on the cusp of inheriting an empire that spanned from Sicily to the Swiss borders. We dated in a whirlwind of luxury at first, private jets to Paris for dinner, diamonds that sparkled like captured stars on my fingers. He courted me with an intensity that bordered on obsession, his touches possessive, his words laced with promises of protection. But there was always an undercurrent, a coldness in his smiles that made me wonder if he was testing me. I ignored it, focusing on the security he offered. When he proposed 6 months later on a yacht off the Amalfi coast with a ring that could buy a small villa, I said yes, without hesitation. Marriage to Luciano meant stability, a shield against the poverty that had haunted my youth. I convinced myself it was love, but deep down, I knew it was survival. The wedding was lavish, a spectacle in a centuries-old cathedral, attended by men whose hands were stained with blood, and women who wore their envy like perfume. I walked down the aisle in white lace, my heart pounding not from joy, but from the finality of it. That night, in our suite overlooking the sea, he held me close and whispered, "You're mine now, Mara." Completely. His grip was firm, almost bruising, and I mistook it for passion. But the facade cracked almost immediately after the honeymoon. We returned to Milan, and instead of the penthouse I'd imagined, he took me to a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood, the kind with peeling paint and neighbors who shouted through thin walls. "Business has taken a turn," he said flatly, unpacking boxes in the cramped living room. "Investments went south. We'll make do." I stared at him, disbelief twisting in my gut. "What do you mean? The Rossi family disowned me," he interrupted, his eyes hardening. "Old feuds. It's temporary. We'll rebuild." Temporary. That word became my mantra in the months that followed. But as weeks turned to months, the poverty deepened. Luciano took a job as a mechanic in a dingy garage, coming home with grease under his nails and exhaustion etched on his face. Our meals were pasta from discount markets, our clothes second-hand. The ring he'd given me? Pawned to cover debts. I found work as a waitress in a local trattoria, my hands chapped from washing dishes, my pride eroded with every leering customer. At first, I endured it, telling myself it was a test of our love. But resentment festered. Why had he married me if he couldn't provide? Memories of my father's failures resurfaced, nights without heat, scavenging for food. I began to hide small amounts of cash, squirreling it away in a shoebox under the bed, dreaming of escape. Luciano noticed the distance, his touches growing rarer, his silences more oppressive. One night, after a particularly grueling shift, I snapped. "This isn't what I signed up for," I hissed, slamming a plate down. His response was a cold stare that sent chills down my spine. "What did you sign up for, Mara? Tell me." I bit my tongue, but the seed was planted. He was changing, or perhaps revealing who he'd always been. Ruthless, even in poverty. I'd catch him on late-night calls, his voice low and threatening, speaking in codes that hinted at the underworld he'd supposedly left behind. Was it all a lie? I pushed the thought away, focusing on survival. 6 months in, the first crack appeared. A man showed up at our door, burly and scarred, demanding payment for a loan. Luciano handled it with a quiet menace, slamming the door after a hushed exchange. "Old business," he muttered. But his eyes lingered on me, as if gauging my reaction. That night, in bed, he pulled me close, his breath hot against my ear. "Do you trust me, amore?" "Yes," I lied, my heart racing. But doubt crept in, a shadow that grew with each passing day. By the end of the first year, I was unraveling. The apartment felt like a cage, Luciano's presence a constant reminder of my miscalculation. I started flirting with a regular at the trattoria, a businessman named Marco, who slipped me extra tips and promises of more. It was innocent at first, a way to feel desired, valued. But one evening, after Luciano stormed out following an argument over bills, I met Marco in a nearby bar. His hands on my waist, his lips brushing mine. It was a betrayal born of desperation. When I returned home, Luciano was waiting in the dark, a silhouette against the window. "Where were you?" His voice was calm, Too calm. Out, I said, avoiding his gaze. He stepped closer, his fingers tilting my chin up. Don't lie to me, Mara. I can smell him on you. Panic surged, but I held my ground. You're imagining things. A slow smile curved his lips, devoid of warmth. Am I? That was the first hook, the moment I realized something was deeply wrong. He didn't rage, didn't accuse further. Instead, he turned away, leaving me in the silence, wondering if he knew more than he let on. The poverty dragged on, grinding me down. I took on extra shifts, but the money vanished into emergencies. A broken car, medical bills for his ailing mother. Luciano's demeanor shifted subtly. He became more distant, his eyes following me with an intensity that bordered on predatory. I'd wake to find him watching me sleep, his expression unreadable. One afternoon, rummaging through his drawers for spare change, I found a hidden envelope. Photos of me from before our marriage, at the club, laughing with wealthy patrons. My blood ran cold. Had he known all along? I confronted him that evening. What is this? I demanded, thrusting the photos at him. He glanced at them dismissively. Research. I like to know who I'm marrying. Research? You spied on me? Everyone has secrets, Mara. His tone was laced with something dark, almost amused. What's yours? I stormed out, but the question lingered, a thorn in my mind. My secret. The abortion at 19 after. A fling with a married man who promised the world and delivered nothing. The thefts from my father's associates to fund my escape from that life. Buried traumas that made me crave wealth as a barrier against vulnerability. As the second year loomed, I planned my exit. Marco offered a way out, an apartment in Rome, a job in his firm. I started packing in secret, hiding clothes in my work bag. But Luciano's suspicions grew. He'd leave accidentally open drawers with bank statements showing zero balances, or mutter about loyalty in his sleep. Then came the night that shattered the fragile peace. I returned from a clandestine meeting with Marco to find our apartment ransacked, drawers emptied, furniture overturned. Luciano sat amid the chaos, a gun in his lap. The first time I'd seen him armed since our wedding. Burglars, he said flatly. They took everything of value. But his eyes gleamed with something unspoken, and I wondered if it was staged, a test to see how I'd react to rock bottom. Before we continue the story, please drop a comment telling me where you're watching this from, and don't forget to subscribe to Mara's Betrayal. The pressure built. I confided in Marco, whispering plans over stolen lunches. He's nothing, I said, a failure hiding behind excuses. Marco nodded, but his eyes darted nervously. Be careful. I've heard rumors about Luciano. Old ties. I dismissed it, but unease gnawed at me. That evening, Luciano cooked a rare, decent meal, stew from cheap cuts, and we ate in silence. Halfway through, he set down his fork. Do you regret marrying me, Mara? The question hung like a guillotine. No, I lied again. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. Liar. My fork clattered. What do you want from me? The truth. His voice dropped to a whisper. Why did you say yes? Because you were rich. The words almost escaped, but I swallowed them. Love. He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Love. How quaint. That night, as he slept, I slipped out to call Marco, arranging our departure. But when I returned, the bed was empty. Luciano stood by the window, phone in hand. Who were you talking to? No one. He pocketed the phone, stepping closer. I know everything, Mara. Everything. My heart stopped. Did he? The air thickened with threat, his presence towering, ruthless. I backed away, but he grabbed my wrist, not hard, but firm enough to remind me of his strength. "You're not leaving," he said softly. "Not yet." The words echoed as a promise, or a prison sentence. And in that moment I realized the poverty wasn't just a misfortune. It was a web, and I was entangled, waiting for the spider to strike. The morning after Luciano's whispered, "You're not leaving," not yet, I woke to an apartment that felt colder than the December rain hammering the windows. He was already gone, the bed beside me still made on his side, as if he hadn't slept at all. On the kitchen table lay a single black and white photograph. Me, 2 nights earlier, pressed against Marco in the dim alley behind the trattoria, his mouth on my neck. No note, just the photo, face up, waiting for me like an accusation carved in silver nitrate. My stomach lurched. I flipped it over, half expecting words on the back, but there was nothing. Only the faint smell of developer clinging to the paper, freshly printed. He'd been watching. For how long? I tore the photo into shreds, hands shaking, and flushed the pieces down the toilet, watching them swirl away like the last scraps of my dignity. I went to work on autopilot, smiling at customers while my mind screamed. Every shadow in the street felt like his eyes. When Marco slipped into his usual booth at lunch, I couldn't even look at him. He frowned, leaned forward. "Everything okay, Bella?" I shook my head once, sharp. "We can't do this anymore." His face darkened. "It's him, isn't it? What did he do?" "Nothing," I lied, voice barely above a whisper. It's over." Marco reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled back as if burned. Because in that moment I understood. Luciano hadn't just photographed us. He'd allowed it to happen. He'd waited. That was worse than rage. That was control. When I got home that evening, the apartment was spotless. The chaos from the supposed burglary had vanished, furniture righted, drawers closed, not a speck of dust. Luciano stood at the stove, stirring risotto, sleeves rolled up, looking for all the world like a devoted husband playing at domesticity. The gun I'd seen the night before was nowhere in sight. "Dinner's almost ready," he said without turning around. "You're late." I hovered in the doorway, pulse thudding in my ears. "How long have you known?" He tasted the risotto, added a pinch of salt. "Known what, Mara?" "About Marco." Only then did he face me. His expression was mild, almost curious, as if I'd asked about the weather. "Long enough." The spoon clinked against the pot. "Sit. Eat." I didn't move. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go." He ladled risotto into 2 bowls, steam curling between us. "And you went exactly as far as I predicted." The words landed like a slap, but quieter, more precise. I felt the blood drain from my face. He carried the bowls to the table, pulled out my chair with exaggerated courtesy. "Mangia, you'll need your strength." I sat because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. We ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of forks and the rain against glass. Halfway through the meal, he said, almost conversationally, "Marco won't be coming to the trattoria again." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "What did you do?" Luciano met my eyes, steady and merciless. "I didn't touch him. I simply reminded him that some debts are older than others." He understood. I believed him. God help me, I believed every word. Because I'd seen that look before, on the faces of men who came to collect from my father when I was a child. The calm before the storm. The certainty that the storm would come and no one would stop it. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his even breathing, wondering if he was really asleep or just pretending. I thought about running, grabbing my coat, the shoebox of cash, disappearing into the Milan night. But the door was locked from the inside with a key I'd never seen him use before. And even if I got out, where would I go? He knew my habits, my fears, the few friends I had left. He'd mapped me completely. The second year bled into the third with a grinding sameness that wore grooves into my soul. The poverty never lifted. If anything, it deepened. Our electricity was cut twice. The landlord threatened eviction monthly. Luciano's job at the garage paid barely enough for rent and food, and every time I suggested I look for better work, he'd fix me with that stare and say, "You're safer here." Trust me. Safer. The word became a mockery. I stopped fighting openly. Instead, I retreated inward, building walls inside myself he couldn't touch. I read library books until the pages blurred. I walked circuits around the neighborhood until my feet bled, just to feel something other than trapped. And I watched him, because if he was testing me, I decided I would test him back. I started small, leaving lipstick on a coffee cup I knew he'd use, forgetting to delete a text from an old female acquaintance. Tiny provocations. His reactions were always measured, a tightening of the jaw, a question asked too softly, but never the explosion I half hoped for. He was ice, through and through. One evening in the spring of the third year, he came home with a split knuckle and blood on his shirt cuff. Not his blood. It was too dark, too much. He showered without a word, and when he emerged, the shirt was already burning in the sink, the smell of scorched cotton filling the apartment. I waited until he sat with his whiskey. Whose blood? Someone who needed reminding, he said. About what? He looked at me for a long moment. About boundaries. My skin crawled. You're still involved. All this time, the poverty, the garage, it's a lie. He didn't deny it. Just sipped his drink and watched me over the rim of the glass. Why? My voice cracked. Why marry me if you never left that world? Luciano set the glass down carefully. Because I needed to know what you were. The sentence hung in the air, simple and devastating. Not who. What? I laughed then, a broken sound. And what am I, Luciano? Tell me. You've had 3 years to decide. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, the lamplight carving shadows across his face. A survivor, like me. But survivors take different paths. Some build, some attach. I wanted to scream that he was wrong, that I'd loved him once, in my warped way. But the words died in my throat because they tasted like ash. If you're still watching this story till now, drop a comment so I know you're with me. The summer of that third year brought a heat wave that turned our apartment into an oven. We slept with windows open, the distant wail of sirens, our lullaby. One night, thunder cracked overhead, and the power went out again. In the sudden darkness, Luciano spoke from his side of the bed. Do you remember the yacht? The night I proposed? I stared at the ceiling, rain drumming on the sill. Yes. I almost told you everything then. I turned my head. His profile was a faint outline. Everything? Who I really was, what I suspected about you. A pause. But I wanted certainty. Certainty. The word he always came back to, like a prayer or a curse. And now you have it, I said bitterly. Now I have it. Silence stretched, broken only by thunder rolling away. Then he said something that chilled me more than any threat. I loved you anyway, Mara. That was the problem. Loved. Past tense. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. The next morning he left early, saying the garage needed him. I waited until his footsteps faded down the stairs. Then I did something I hadn't dared in years. I searched the apartment thoroughly. Behind the false panel in the wardrobe, under loose floorboards, inside the lining of his winter coat. Nothing. No money, no gun, no proof of the empire I knew still existed. Until I pried open the rusted vent above the stove. Inside was a small metal box. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside lay a single USB drive and a stack of photographs. All of me. Not just with Marco. With every man I'd ever smiled at too long. Every client at the club who'd bought me drinks. Every fleeting moment of weakness from the past 5 years. Dates scrawled on the backs in Luciano's precise handwriting. And on top, a new photo. Me, yesterday, sitting on a park bench talking to a woman I hadn't seen since childhood. Elena, my mother's old friend. I'd bumped into her by accident, shared a coffee, cried a little about how hard life had become. He'd been there, watching even that. I sat on the kitchen floor with the box in my lap, the USB drive cold against my palm, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt something sharper than fear. Fury. That evening when he came home, I was waiting with dinner already on the table, his favorite veal saltimbocca, bought with the last of my hidden cash. I'd even opened the 1 bottle of Barolo we'd saved from better days. He paused in the doorway, eyes narrowing at the candles, the good plates. What's this? A celebration, I said, smiling in a way I hadn't in years. 3 years of marriage. He didn't smile back, but he sat. We ate, we drank. And when the bottle was half empty, I leaned forward. I found your collection, I said softly. The vent was loose. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe even admiration. And? I twirled the stem of my glass. I want to know how it ends, Luciano. This experiment of yours. Because I'm tired. He studied me, the candlelight reflecting in his eyes like twin flames. You think it's almost over? I think you've proved whatever you needed to prove. My voice didn't shake, so tell me the truth. All of it. He was quiet for so long, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he reached into his pocket and laid something on the table between us. A key. Small, brass, old-fashioned. The front door, he said. It's been unlocked for 6 months. You just never tried it. I stared at the key, then at him. My world tilted. You could have left any time, he continued, voice low. But you didn't. Why? Because I had nowhere to go. Because I was afraid. Because part of me still hoped the money would come back and fix everything. I didn't say any of it. I just looked at him and realized the test had never been about my greed. It had been about my cage, whether I'd rattle the bars or learn to live inside them. He stood, walked around the table, and stopped behind my chair. His hand settled on my shoulder, heavy, possessive. Tomorrow, he said against my ear, everything changes. His fingers tightened, not quite painful, but a promise of it. Sleep well, Mara. You'll need your strength. He left me there with the key glinting in the candlelight and the taste of veal turning to ash in my mouth. Outside, thunder rumbled again, closer this time. And I knew, whatever waited tomorrow wasn't freedom. It was judgment. I didn't sleep. How could I? The key sat on the nightstand like a loaded gun, gleaming faintly in the streetlight that leaked through the curtains. Luciano's words, "Tomorrow everything changes," looped in my head until dawn bled gray across the sky. When he finally stirred beside me, I pretended to be asleep, regulating my breathing, counting heartbeats. He rose without a word, showered, dressed in the same worn jeans and faded shirt he'd worn for 3 years. But something was different. The way he knotted his tie beneath the open collar, precise, deliberate. A habit from another life. He left at 7:30, the door clicking shut behind him with the soft finality of a coffin lid. I waited 10 minutes, then 20, listening for footsteps on the stairs. Nothing. I threw on clothes, grabbed the key he'd left, and walked to the front door. It opened easily. No resistance, no alarm. Just the stale air of the hallway and the distant sound of a neighbor's television. I stood on the threshold, free for the first time in years, and felt nothing. No rush of relief, no urge to run. Only a hollow certainty that freedom was part of the game, too. I went back inside, made coffee with hands that didn't shake anymore, and waited. He returned at noon. Not alone. 2 men in tailored black suits flanked him, tall, silent, faces carved from the same stone as his. One carried a leather duffel. The other held a garment bag over his arm like a butler from a life I'd almost forgotten. Luciano didn't introduce them. He simply nodded toward the bedroom. "Pack what you want to keep. We're leaving." I set my coffee down slowly. "Leaving for where?" "Home." The word landed between us like a verdict. Home. Not this apartment. The real one. I didn't ask if I had a choice. I already knew the answer. While the men waited in the living room, I walked into our bedroom and looked around. 3 years of captivity reduced to a single suitcase. I took only the essentials. A few dresses I'd bought before the marriage, the library books I'd never returned, the shoebox of hidden cash, still intact, untouched. When I emerged, Luciano was standing by the window, staring down at the street as if memorizing it. "You kept the money," he said without turning. "I earned it." A faint exhale, almost a laugh. "Yes, you did." The drive took 40 minutes, out of the city, north along Lake Como, until the road narrowed and climbed into the hills. The car was a black Mercedes I didn't recognize, engine purring like a predator at rest. No one spoke. I watched the landscape shift from urban gray to manicured green, villas peeking through cypress trees, the lake glittering below like spilled mercury. We turned through wrought iron gates that swung open silently, up a private drive lined with ancient olives. And then the house appeared. Not a house. A fortress disguised as a villa. Pale stone, terraced gardens, windows that reflected the sky like watchful eyes. Armed men at the entrance, subtle but unmistakable. They nodded to Luciano as we passed. He didn't nod back. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and old money. Marble floors, frescoed ceilings, art that belonged in museums. Staff appeared and vanished like ghosts, taking the bags, offering chilled Prosecco I didn't touch. Luciano led me through corridors I barely registered until we reached a study on the second floor. Dark wood, leather, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves hiding what I suspected were safes and weapons. He closed the door behind us. The click echoed. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. 3 years of filth and pretense stripped away, and here he stood, The man I'd married before the fall. Tailored suit hugging his frame, watch glinting on his wrist. The quiet authority that had drawn me in the first place, now sharpened to a lethal edge. Ask, he said. So I did. How much was real? Everything after the wedding night. He moved to the sideboard, poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, 30-year scotch from the smell, handed me one. The poverty, the garage, the debts, all staged. I took the glass but didn't drink. Why 3 years? Because anything less and you might have played the devoted wife. Convincingly. I needed time to see the cracks. The cracks. My affair, my hidden money, my resentment. All catalogued, measured, weighed. And if I'd stayed loyal, I asked. If I'd never touched Marco, never hidden a single euro. His eyes darkened. Then you would have passed. Passed, as if I were a test subject, not a wife. What happens to those who fail? He sipped his scotch, considering. Depends how badly. I set my glass down untouched. And me? Luciano stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, oud and bergamot, the scent I'd missed in the years of cheap soap and sweat. His fingers brushed my jaw, tilting my face up. You didn't just fail, Mara. You confirmed every suspicion I had the day I first saw you at that gala. You looked at me and saw a ledger, not a man. I wanted to deny it. The words rose and died, because he was right. But, he continued, thumb tracing my lower lip, you also survived 3 years of a hell I designed specifically for you. Most would have broken sooner. Begged. Run. You adapted. That interested me. Interested. Not forgave. Not loved. He released me and walked to the window overlooking the lake. This empire, shipping, ports, half the construction in northern Italy. It's mine now. The Rossi family tried to cut me out 5 years ago. I let them think they succeeded. Then I took it all back from the shadows while pretending to scrape by in that shithole apartment. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. And I was collateral, the perfect alibi. Poor Luciano, disowned, struggling with his greedy little wife. He turned, expression unreadable. You were the final piece. If my wife couldn't endure hardship with me, how could I trust anyone else? The logic was twisted, ruthless, utterly him. What now? I asked. You parade me around as the loyal spouse while I smile and pretend none of it happened? No. He crossed the room again, stopping inches away. Now you choose. I searched his face for mockery and found none. Choose what? Door 1. You stay. As my wife, in this house, with every luxury you ever dreamed of. But you never leave these grounds without my permission. You belong to me completely. Body, secrets, future. No more games. My throat tightened. And door 2? You walk away. Today. With enough money to disappear anywhere in the world. New name, new life. I'll even make sure no one ever finds you. His voice dropped. But you never see me again. And you never speak of this. Of me. To anyone. The offer hung in the air, seductive and terrifying. Freedom, real this time. Or a gilded cage with the most dangerous man I'd ever known. I should have chosen door 2. Any sane woman would have. But I hesitated, because in that moment I understood something monstrous about myself. The poverty had stripped away the illusions, but it had also bound me to him in ways wealth never could have. We had survived something together, manufactured or not, and survival forges chains stronger than diamonds. Time's up, he said quietly. I met his gaze. What happens if I stay? His smile was slow, predatory. Then you learn what it really means to be the wife of Luciano Valenti. He didn't wait for my answer. He simply turned and opened a drawer in the desk, removing a thin folder. Placed it in front of me. Inside were divorce papers, already signed by him. Dated yesterday. My breath caught. "Sign," he said, "and you're free. The money is wired the moment the judge stamps it. Walk out that door and a car will take you to the airport." I stared at the blank line waiting for my signature. The pen felt heavier than any gun. I picked it up, and then I heard it, a faint sound from the hallway. Footsteps, familiar ones. The door opened without a knock. Marco stood there, pale, hands bound behind his back, blood drying at the corner of his mouth. One of Luciano's men held him by the elbow. Our eyes met. His widened in recognition, then horror. Luciano didn't even glance at him. I forgot to mention door 3. He took the pen from my numb fingers and set it down. Door 3. You watch what happens to people who touch what's mine. Then you decide if freedom is worth the cost. Marco tried to speak, but the guard clamped a hand over his mouth. Luciano leaned close, lips brushing my ear. He's been in the basement since the night I showed you the photograph. Alive, waiting for your choice. My knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the desk to stay upright. You said you didn't touch him. I said I didn't kill him. Yet. The room tilted. 3 years of calculated cruelty crystallized in this single moment. Luciano straightened. Take her to the guest wing, he told the guard. Let her think. As they led me past Marco, his muffled pleas vibrated against the hand over his mouth. His eyes begged me, save me, forgive me, help me. I couldn't look at him. The guest wing was a suite larger than our old apartment, with a balcony overlooking the lake. The door locked from the outside. Soft, luxurious imprisonment. I stood at the window for hours, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, painting the water blood red. Choice 1, stay and become whatever Luciano wanted. Accomplice, ornament, prisoner. Choice 2, sign the papers, take the money, board a plane, and spend the rest of my life wondering if Marco's screams would ever stop echoing in my dreams. Choice 3 didn't exist. It never had. Night fell. Dinner was brought and left untouched. At midnight, the lock clicked. Luciano entered alone, carrying a small wooden box. He set it on the table, opened it. Inside lay the USB drive from the vent, and beside it a single gold wedding band. Mine, the one I'd pawned in the 2nd year. He picked up the ring, held it out, put it on. I didn't move. He waited, patient as death. Finally, I took it. The metal was warm from his hand. I slid it onto my finger. It fit perfectly, as if the years of struggle had never stretched or scarred me. Luciano's eyes softened, imperceptibly, but I saw it. Good, he said. He turned to leave. What happens to Marco? I asked, voice barely audible. Luciano paused at the door. That depends on how well you learn your new role. The door closed, locked. I stood there in the dark, the ring heavy on my finger, the lake black and endless beyond the glass. And for the first time in 3 years I cried. Not from fear or rage, but from the terrifying realization that I had just chosen the cage. Willingly. The first time I killed a man, it was with the small Beretta Luciano had placed in my hand months earlier. The one I'd chosen myself in the armory. It happened on a rain-slick night in late October, 6 months after I'd slid the wedding ring back onto my finger and chosen the cage. We were in a warehouse by the Naples port, the air thick with salt, diesel, and the sour stink of fear. Luciano had brought me not as decoration, but as witness. Another calculated step in the education he'd been giving me since the day I cut my own palm instead of Marco's skin. The man kneeling before us was Riccardo De Luca, once a trusted capo. He'd been skimming shipments, feeding roots to the Camorra. Luciano had known for months, let the betrayal fester just long enough to see who else was infected. Now Riccardo knelt, bleeding from the mouth, begging in a voice that cracked like dry earth. Luciano stood behind him, hands in the pockets of his black overcoat, calm as winter stone. He looked at me. "Finish it." The warehouse fell silent except for rain hammering the roof and Riccardo's ragged breaths. 3 guards waited in the shadows, faces blank. No one would interfere. I stepped forward. The Beretta was already in my hand. He'd pressed it there in the car, saying nothing, just closing my fingers around the grip. Riccardo looked up. "Signora, please, I have children." I raised the gun. My hand didn't shake, not from courage, from practice. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times since the basement. Every possible failure, every flinch. None came. 2 shots. Center mass. The muzzle flashes lit the warehouse like lightning. Riccardo slumped sideways, surprise etched forever on his face. The smell of cordite hung heavy. Luciano crouched beside the body, checked the pulse out of habit, then stood and looked at me. "You hesitated." "Only for a second." "That second could have cost you." "It didn't." Approval flickered in his eyes, dark, reluctant. He took the gun, cleared it with practiced efficiency, then handed it back. "Keep it. Always." We left the body for the men to clean. In the car riding north, rain streaking the windows, he finally spoke again. "You didn't ask why." "I already knew." "Why?" "Traitors die. That's the rule." "Does it bother you?" I considered honestly. The weight in my chest wasn't remorse. It was colder. Acceptance. "It bothers me that it doesn't bother me more." He reached over, brushed my cheek, almost tender. "That's the moment most people break. You didn't." "No," I said. "I was tempered." After Naples, the leash lengthened. I began sitting at the table during meetings, no longer in the shadows. Luciano introduced me simply as my wife, and no one dared question it. I listened, learned the rhythms of power, who deferred, who postured, who lied with a smile. I started spotting things Luciano sometimes missed, the nervous tick in a capo's eye when certain routes were mentioned, the way a supplier's voice pitched higher quoting prices. One night I flagged a discrepancy in the Genoa ledgers. Luciano ordered an audit. 2 days later, another body surfaced in the harbor. He never thanked me aloud, but that evening a velvet box waited on my pillow. A necklace of black diamonds, cold and perfect against my throat. I wore it to a tense dinner with the head of the 'Ndrangheta clan from Calabria. The man's gaze lingered on the stones, then on the faint scar on my palm. He smiled too widely. "Your wife has expensive taste, Valenti." Luciano's hand settled on my thigh beneath the table, possessive. "She earns it." The Calabrian laughed, thinking it a jest. I smiled back, letting him see the blade beneath the silk. He stopped laughing. Later, in our bedroom, Luciano pinned me to the wall, mouth hot on my neck. "You enjoyed that." "Yes." "Be careful. Power is addictive." I wrapped my legs around him, nails scoring his back. "So are you." We never spoke of love. What bound us was darker, truer. Recognition, hunger, mutual sharpening. But even the sharpest blade can turn. The first real fracture came 9 months after Naples. Luciano started disappearing for days. Switzerland, he claimed. Banking. I didn't fully believe him. I'd learned to read the tension in his jaw, the way he avoided my eyes when he returned carrying the ghost of another woman's perfume. Faint, floral, expensive. I didn't confront him. I investigated. Small kindnesses to staff bought quiet loyalty. One night the driver mentioned in passing that Signore Valenti visited a private clinic in Lugano, not a bank. I smiled, asked nothing, doubled his bonus. 2 weeks later I flew to Milan alone, officially shopping. Unofficially, I hired an investigator who served jealous tycoons and paranoid politicians. Money opened doors fast. The report arrived in a plain envelope. Photos of Luciano entering a lakeside building. A woman waiting, mid-30s, elegant, severe, dark hair. They embraced like family, not lovers. More photos. The woman pushing a stroller. Inside, a toddler. Dark hair, gray eyes. The last image, Luciano holding the boy, smiling in a way I had never seen aimed at me. Soft, real. The note was clinical. Sofia Ricci, retired physician. Child, Matteo Valenti, born 14 months ago. Paternity confirmed. I sat on the hotel balcony until dawn, the envelope searing my lap. He had a son, a secret life tucked across the border. When I returned that evening, Luciano was in the study. He ended his call when I entered, smiled, warm, genuine. How was Milan? Productive. I placed the envelope on his desk. He recognized the seal. Something shuddered behind his eyes. You went looking. You gave me reason. He opened it, glanced at the photos, set them aside. Ask. Is he yours? Yes. How long? Sophia was before you. We ended when I decided to marry. She discovered the pregnancy after. I let her go, set her up. She wanted distance. I gave it. And the boy? I see him when I can. He doesn't know me as father yet. One day. I laughed, sharp, ugly. While I scraped mold off bread in that apartment, your son was raised in Swiss comfort. You were the test, Mara. She wasn't part of it. That's not an answer. He stood, rounded the desk. I didn't tell you because I knew how you'd react. Like a gold digger realizing she's the spare? Like a woman who might weaponize a child. The accusation struck deep. Would I? I asked quietly. Or are you projecting? Silence, thick and dangerous. Finally, Matteo is protected, separate from this life. From us. I turned to leave. His hand caught my wrist, gentle but immovable. Mara? I looked back. I didn't lie about the poverty, or why I staged it. This was never about you. But it changes everything. Does it? Yes. Because now I know there's a softness in you I'll never touch. I walked out. We entered a cold war. I threw myself into the business with ruthless precision, overseeing shipments, negotiating, identifying rival weaknesses. My decisions grew sharper. Men began seeking my nod almost as often as his. Whispers spread. The Signora has ice in her veins. One December night, snow dusting the mountains, Luciano found me cleaning the Beretta in the armory. We're invited to a wedding in Sicily. Old allies. We go together. Or we don't go. You're giving me a choice? I'm asking. I set the gun down. Why now? Because I'm tired of the distance. I studied him. Shadows under his eyes. He hadn't been sleeping either. And Matteo? He stays safe where he is. I nodded. I'll go. Relief flashed across his face, quickly hidden. The wedding was in a hilltop town near Palermo. Baroque churches, blood-orange groves. We arrived by private jet, greeted like royalty. I wore crimson silk, black diamonds at my throat. Luciano's hand rested on my lower back all evening, possessive, proud. On the dance floor beneath strings of lights and jasmine, he pulled me close. "I was wrong," he said against my ear. "About what?" "Not telling you, thinking I could keep him separate." I pulled back to see his face. "And now?" "Now I want you to meet him, if you want." The offer was fragile as glass. I thought of the photos, the soft smile, the boy with his father's eyes. "Do you still love her?" "No." Immediate, certain. "Then yes." His arms tightened, almost crushing. Later, in our suite overlooking the sea, he undressed me slowly, reverently, seeking forgiveness in every touch. We moved together like people exorcising ghosts. Afterward, tangled in sheets scented with salt and jasmine, he whispered, "I never faked everything, Mara." I traced an old scar on his shoulder. "I know." But as sleep pulled at me, one thought circled. He had hidden a child. He was still capable of hiding more. Trust, once cracked, never fully mends. It just learns to cut deeper. We flew to Lugano in early spring, Alps jagged against a painfully blue sky. Luciano piloted the helicopter himself, silent behind sunglasses. I sat beside him, diamonds catching light with every turn of my head. Nothing was said. Everything waited below. The house was modern glass and stone, discreetly walled. Sophia opened the door before we reached it. Tall, composed, eyes assessing me once before settling on Luciano with quiet resignation. "He's napping," she said, "but he'll wake soon." Luciano nodded. I followed him inside. Light-filled rooms, toys scattered like bright confetti, photos on the walls, Matteo at various ages, Luciano in none, a deliberate absence. Sophia poured coffee we didn't drink. Silence snapped. "I'll wake him," she said, and disappeared. Luciano stood at the window, rigid. I watched him and felt something vicious uncoil inside me. This merciless man now looked almost uncertain. Small footsteps. Matteo appeared, tousled dark hair, gray eyes exactly like his father's, clutching a worn stuffed bear. He stopped, shy. Sophia crouched behind him. "This is Papa," she said softly. "And Mara." Luciano dropped to one knee, arms open. Matteo ran to him. Luciano caught him, lifted him high, pressed his face into the boy's neck. The sound he made, half laugh, half broken exhale, was raw, unguarded. I had never heard it before. I stood frozen, intruder, in a moment, not mine. Matteo studied his father solemnly, touched his cheek. "Papa gone long time." "I know, Tesoro. I'm sorry." The boy nodded, accepting, then twisted to look at me. "You pretty." Sophia smiled faintly. Luciano's eyes met mine over the child's head, wary, pleading. I crouched. "Thank you. You're very handsome." He grinned, held out the bear. "This Orso. He protects me." I took it gravely. "He looks brave." Satisfied, Matteo took my hand. "Come see trains." I let him lead me. The nursery was a bright chaos of wooden tracks and engines. He chattered, explaining elaborate stories only he understood. I listened, asked questions, felt something inside me crack and bleed. Luciano watched from the doorway. Sophia brought juice and biscuits. We sat on the floor like a strange, temporary family. Matteo climbed between us, claiming us both with toddler certainty. When he dozed off against Luciano's chest, Sophia carried him to bed. Luciano and I stood on the terrace, lake black glass below. "She'll move to the States next month," he said. "New identity, enough money to vanish comfortably. Matteo will grow up far from this. And you? Visits twice a year, birthdays, Christmas. That's what she wants. Grief twisted in me, not jealousy but sorrow for what none of us could have. Will you tell him about me? When he's old enough to understand why his father couldn't stay. I nodded, swallowed hard. Luciano took my hand. Come home. We flew back in darkness. When we landed, he didn't release my hand as we walked inside. In the master bedroom, he undressed me slowly, mapping every mark the years had left. When he entered me, it was different. Less claim, more confession. Afterward, he held me so tightly I felt his heartbeat against my spine. I love you, he said into my hair, words rough, as if dragged out after years locked away. I fought it every day of those 3 years. I lost. I turned, touched his face. I know. We didn't trade the words like normal couples. We didn't need to. The truth had broken me once. Now it bound me. 3 months later, while Luciano was in Rome handling a brewing war with the Calabrians, I sat in the study reviewing ledgers. Numbers had become my cleanest language. I spotted an anomaly, recurring transfers to a Cayman account. Small enough to miss, large enough to matter over time. I traced it through shells, using the unrestricted access he'd granted me. The trust beneficiary, Matteo Valenti. The trustee with sole authority, me. My name, my signature, my biometrics, embedded weeks after Lugano. Quiet, irrevocable. If Luciano fell, Matteo's future would pass through my hands. Not Sophia's. Mine. I closed the laptop, walked to the window. Moonlit lake, silent gardens. I thought of the girl who once hid cash in a shoebox. The woman who fired 2 shots in Naples and felt only clarity. The boy who offered me his bear and called me pretty. And I understood what Luciano had been forging all along. Not an exposed gold digger, not a broken prisoner. A partner, equal in ruthlessness, capable of carrying his empire and his heart if he fell. The truth didn't break me this time. It remade me. When Luciano returned 2 days later, exhausted, blood on his cuff that wasn't his, I met him in the hall. He stopped when he saw my face. You found it? Yes. He waited. I stepped close, pressed his hand over my heart. I'm not going anywhere. Not ever. Relief crashed through him so violently his knees nearly buckled. He pulled me against him, face buried. In my neck. I know, he whispered. That's why I gave it to you. We stood there long minutes, 2 predators who finally understood we were safer together than apart. Later, in bed, moonlight striping the sheets, he asked, Do you regret any of it? I thought of the poverty, the betrayals, the blood, the child I would hold only in stolen moments. No, I said. It led me here. To this. He kissed me, slow, deliberate, sealing something irreversible. Outside, the lake kept its ancient secrets. Inside, we kept ours. And if the world ever came for us, for him, I would be ready. Not the gold digger he once tested. Not the wife he broke and rebuilt. But the woman who held his empire, his son, his life in her hands. And who would burn it all down before letting anyone take it from us. The truth broke me once. Now it was mine to wield. If you liked the story, drop a comment for part 2, and don't forget to subscribe to Mara's Betrayal.